everybody, it's Jackson Fulcher, and it's that time of year where I release another delayed video. This time, it's the worst movies of the year list, my personal picks for the movies that I did not care for at all in 2020. Although, if you were to ask, would you rather watch these movies again or go through 2020 again, I would say I would watch these movies again. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, last year was definitely way worse than any movie that I could actually watch. Like, realistically, yeah, the entire year is way worse than, like, a movie where it only takes a few hours of my time, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna try to keep things in perspective for this video goes. I know a lot of worst lists get a lot of hate now because it seems like dogpiling and, you know, instead of celebrating film, why you gotta try to tear it down. I'm not really gonna try to do that. Really, I try to use this now as just kind of like a catch-up because I don't review everything I see. I don't really have the time, especially now, anymore. So I try to use this as just like a, hey, this is what I've been watching, and for this specific video, these are the ones that I've been watching that I didn't really like. I'm not gonna try to turn this into just a let's hate on everything and let's like insult everyone involved with every movie we talk about. There's a lot of jobs that were created because of these movies. A lot of people were enjoying themselves while making them. I'm sure a lot of relationships were made during a lot of these movies. And a lot of time and effort is put into making them, while at the end of the day, I'm just a guy who watches them and then sits in front of a camera for a select few minutes of time just to talk about them. Not the same kind of effort. So at the end of this video, of course, leave your thoughts in the comments below if there's a movie you disagree with me on, or if you have your own list that you want to share. But let's not try to insult any of the people involved. Let's try to keep it into perspective. Like, yes, let's talk about how the movies are bad, but you know, realistically, these movies aren't really hurting us. Okay, there's a select few that I would say are like morally reprehensible. Those are like near the top of the list, and I'll talk about those. But the majority of these movies are just movies that didn't work out. So let's try to keep that into perspective. As somebody who recently released something that got a lot of shit and had insults directed at me for it, I can personally relate. Let me mention that video really quickly because I don't know if I'll ever make like a video reacting to those comments because it's just such a clusterfuck of a situation with that movie. I know why there's so many dislikes on it. I know the kind of audience that movie would attract. You know, a certain person releasing it, and then, you know, you already have some backlash towards it, and then people that want to support the movie are just whipped up into a frenzy. You know, I understand the situation surrounding it. I'm aware that my audience isn't the one that's mass disliking that video and saying stuff like I'm lying, even though I'm really not. Just because I didn't say something verbatim or pull up the clip of exactly what that guy that I mentioned said doesn't mean I'm lying. If I really did want to make a video talking about every comment I got on that video, we'd be here forever, you know, and I don't really feel like dredging that up. Maybe I'll pull a midway and like several months later I'll finally release something, you know, but I don't know, I just don't really feel like dwelling into that anymore because it's just a toxic cesspool, that comment section. Although I will admit, even though I do tell myself like this isn't my audience very clearly, you know, like, and not even everyone who's watched it has disliked it or even commented. I mean, I'd be lying if I said seeing the like and to dislike ratio just like go like this, you know. It does sting a bit, you know. I feel like that's a thing for anyone, really, you know. A lot of people have thick skin, a lot of people don't care about what people say, but then there's a lot of people who see certain things like that and are like, ooh, ouch, you know, especially if people aren't really being constructive about what they found wrong with your thing. They're just like, oh, you're stupid, you're a liar, you don't know what you're talking about. I know it's hard for leftists to be honest, but damn, you know, like stuff like that. It's like, it does sting a bit. So ultimately, I'm gonna try not to be like any of those people who basically have nothing better to do than to comment on a video that I specifically told them, you probably won't like this review, you should just click off it right now. It'd look pretty foolish if you commented something even though I told you just to click off, and then they do. Not because I thought it would work, just because it's just funny to me how people will just ignore what you say just to be hateful. Like, well, he already said I should probably click off, but I'll watch on and then leave a comment anyways, just to be hateful, even though he definitely gave me the warning to not watch. And someone even tried to say, like, you shouldn't try to discourage people from watching your reviews, and I can get that, but in this case, it was like, no, I can only see one outcome for this, so whatever. The point is, I still stand by everything I said in that review, and I take nothing back, and I have no apologies for anyone. So let's not try to be like those people. Let's be self-aware about the positions we are, and let's just talk about some movies that weren't very good. I do have a lot of dishonorable mentions though, because like I said, I haven't reviewed everything that I saw, so this will be a quick rundown of like, hey, I also saw these movies, and I didn't particularly care for them. This is my list. If you disagree, that's totally fine, but it's my personal list. What else do I need to mention? Oh, anything that's not on here, either maybe I liked it a little more or I didn't see it. Alright, let's go over some dishonorable mentions. Bill and Ted Face the Music. I know this is the movie that a lot of people are like, this is the movie we need right now, this positivity. And I just watched it. Me, being a fan of both the first Bill and Ted and Bogus Journey, I like those movies quite a bit actually. I did not particularly care for Face the Music. Coffee and Kareem. The Turning, which by the way, just watched The Haunting of Bly Manor, much better. Doolittle. The Grudge, Godmothered, The Craft Legacy. I watched The Craft before watching The Craft Legacy, and I wasn't a big fan of that, but I respect it a whole lot now. Capone, Lost Girls. This came out like around when March came and everything was getting shut down. I wanted to watch this movie, but that was the time where I entered a really bad funk, and I was just like, to hell with it. I finally did watch it like a month or two ago, and I was ultimately disappointed. A lot of it is just like setting up the clips for Amy Ryan to get like Best Actress or something. QB Halloween, The New Mutants, Inheritance, Artemis Fowl, A Fall from Grace. I will say, Tyler Perry, he made quite the entertaining and interesting bad movie with that one. Wow. Like, it goes to a certain place near the end where the movie got worse, but I was like blown away at just the lengths they were willing to go. I was shot in like 5 days or whatever. Jesus Christ. Dangerous Lies. The Room. Not the Tommy Wiseau one. Jesus Christ. Like a Boss. The Main Event, basically like a Nickelodeon pilot just made into a movie. A Nice Girl Like You, The Tax Collector, An Imperfect Murder, The Kissing Booth 2, Justice for Marco though, justice for that guy. Bloodshot. I can't believe, I think they announced they're in development of a sequel. I can't believe that. I don't want to believe that's true. Fantasy Island, Ava, and Fatal Affair, closing it off with another Netflix thriller that ultimately wasn't very good. So those are all the dishonorable mentions movies that some of them I reviewed and then a lot of them I didn't, that I didn't particularly care for, that could have made it onto this top 10, but these 10 movies I disliked even more. So let's get right on into it. This is weird because it's that kind of movie that has like an interesting premise to examine like society, like some aspect of it. In this case, trying to examine teenagers who feel like social media likes and positivity from social media is their way to fame. It's the only way they know how to feel good, is trying to appeal to them and doing anything to get as much attention as possible. But this movie goes about it in the worst way, where these characters, they get likes and views and followers on their Instagram for robbing 7-Elevens. Like, there's a bunch of people just cheering them on, like, yeah, you robbed that 7-Eleven real good. And it's like, why? Like, realistically, if there are Instagrammers that were robbing people on Instagram Live, they probably wouldn't have this many people going like, yes, we love you. It'd be like, you're sick, you're disgusting, oh my god, what the hell? You know, like, this isn't... If they were robbing rich people and, you know, they people who were fans of them were finding some way to, like, philosophize what it was they were doing and try to lift them up, then I could see it. Essentially, if you did something smarter with the premise, but ultimately they just went with, like, the bare minimum. And I was not really a fan of that. They bump into a fan. They hijack her car, the actress being Amber Riley, and she's just kind of there to be like, yeah, I'm a fan of you guys for some reason, and you guys are pretty cool with me, I'll help you out. Oh, it's that time of the movie where I leave. Alright. And it's like, what was the point? Bella Thorne has had a rocky past couple of years, and I don't just mean movies, so I'm always hoping like maybe she'll find her stride somewhere, but this really is not it. Her this movie is ultimately kind of carried by her performance, but it buckles from the pressure in a lot of specific moments. I really don't think she was the right person for this role. Directed by Olivier Megaton. If you think that name is familiar, it might be, because he's the director of Colombiana, The Transporter 3, and Taken 2 and Take 3 in, the worst Taken movies. This guy is basically responsible for some of the most incoherently shot action in recent memory. And this movie is his epic. It's 2 hours, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, something like that, available on Netflix now, so it's not like you had to sit in the theater for 2.5 hours watching this, but goddamn, I was dozing off during a lot of this. Like, it's just so long and everything is just so dull, too. If you had an engaging story from the start, it'd be like, okay, who cares about a runtime? I'm invested with these people, but I wasn't. It's a combination of the storytelling isn't that great, the characters I found dull and bland, but these actors, unfortunately, are all over the place. Michael Pitt, on the IMDb trivia, it said like he was trying to channel like Jerry Lewis, and I was like, bro, if that's who you're trying to channel, you're doing a really poor job of it, and your character is now suffering as a whole. There's a couple times where I'm like, you know what, I kind of like the setup for these action scenes, like I kind of like the idea that you've got for it going in, but this is the man who previously directed Liam Neeson jumping over a fence with like 1 billion takes, so of course it's not going to look good at the end of the day. I was not interested in this movie at all. Maybe the graphic novel is much better, but if it's pretty much the same plot, then I don't know, because the plot itself is kind of dumb, actually. Like, there's certain plot reveals as it goes on where I was like, alright, now, you already started off with kind of a flimsy idea of a premise, and now it's even more so falling apart. You might be wondering, Jackson, why the hell did you even watch this movie? You didn't even like the first one that went to theaters, and you didn't even like the other straight-to-DVD sequels. Why did you watch this? Because I was forced to, goddammit. A friend of mine, in quotes, forced me to watch this movie, and it's one of those where, you know, just everything about it doesn't work for me. Like, the characters I don't care about, mostly because of the other installments too. The story I was just completely uninterested in. The animation looks better than the other Norm of the North movies, but it still looks cheap, like straight-to-DVD quality. But it didn't really do anything that offended me. It was just all around nothing was working. There was like no premise that I was interested in, no ideas for certain sequences that I was like, you know what, that's kind of cool. Just everything was kind of flatlining for me, but not in a horribly offensive way. Honestly, I'm surprised that this franchise is apparently so popular. They got like a 5th one in the works, and I'm just wondering, like, kids barely went out to see the first Norm of the North in theaters. Are there really that many going out to see these straight-to-DVD sequels? Is that really what's happening? Because I don't know, I can't see it for some reason. Maybe that is a thing. Kids really do love Norm of the North and I'm just oblivious, but I don't get it. This movie completely shit on the first movie in every way, which is surprising because it's directed and written by the same people who made that first movie. Now, maybe this was under contract, you have to make a sequel, so make something that we can make a franchise out of, but I feel like even if this was under contract, there's probably a better way you go about making a sequel and trying to franchise this than what they end up doing. Because ultimately what they ended up doing was completely contradicting that first movie, and anyone who liked that first movie now is just left with this sequel that did not want to appeal to them at all. It's just a straight up haunted doll movie, whereas the first one was more psychological thriller. I have my issues with it. I don't think that's a perfect movie, but as I mentioned in my review, that's a movie that I can turn on like if I have nothing else to watch and I'm just in this state of I need to watch something familiar but not something I can like pay attention to because, you know, I'm whatever. I have a couple of go-tos, but The Boy has kind of gone up to one of them because it is one of those movies that I find enjoyable despite some issues that I have with it. Brahms The Boy too, I mean, I guess you could say it's enjoyable in certain aspects, not really intentional or in the ways the creators wanted. It's really bad. You probably don't know what this movie is, but it's another one of those movies that has like a famous actor, but it went straight to DVD and that actor is like barely in it. This case it is Nicolas Cage in a Predator Matrix Bourne Identity kind of ripoff. It's really unoriginal in every single way. It doesn't help that like when Nicolas Cage is there, it's not like an interesting character, and even though he's trying to be crazy Nick Cage and get you invested, it's like, I don't know, that can only go so far. in specific kind of roles, and this really isn't it. The budget of this movie was $25 million according to Wikipedia, but I refuse to believe that's real because there are so many CGI shots that look terrible. The alien costume is really bad, and sometimes they superimpose a CG face in like the blue visor it has, and that looks awful too. There's a moment where they try to do not just a one-take action scene, but they intersplice it with shots that look like POV, like a Hardcore Henry kind of thing, and I can commend them for trying, but the action in this movie is not edited well, and it does not look convincing. None of these actors, especially Tony Jaa, seem like they were doing a good job with these martial arts fights or seem convincing at all. And as I said, this is Tony Jaa who's in this movie, and it's all because of the filmmaking and the editing after the fact that really ruins these scenes. And ultimately this whole movie, the plot, this alien creature shows up to have a contest with the humans, and it's just so they can fight Jiu Jitsu, but you gotta do it honorably, even though I will use my alien weapons against you, but you better not team up or anything to take me down. It's one at a time. You don't get any weapons. I do, though. It's like, what is this plot? This is an HBO Max original film starring Melissa McCarthy, and unfortunately it is another one of those directed by her husband, Ben Falcone. I really do like the fact that these guys are happy together and that they make movies together. That's really cool. That's a dream. But the thing is that if they were to announce like, hey, we're gonna stay together, but we're not going to make movies together anymore, I would be very pleased, because they just seem to bring out the worst in each other just as far as like entertainment goes. That's usually when you can tell people are improvising for way too long, or the jokes aren't working but they're trying their best, or Melissa McCarthy is now just going on, and it's like, it's not funny, please stop. And what's even more interesting about this movie to me is that James Corden, this is, in my opinion, his worst performance, and I know what you're all going to say. But what about Cats? He's better in Cats, if I'm gonna be for real. Like, at least in Cats, for some reason, he seemed into it, you know? Like, you watch him and it's like, alright, he seems into this role for whatever reason. It may not be particularly good, great even, but he is at least putting something into it. Once again, still not good, but he seems interested in this role. In this, it's just like they got him on a lunch break of his talk show. You know, they're just like, hey, James, you want to be in our movie? And he was like, all right. Sorry for the British accent. All right. I'll only do it if you come in here on my lunch break. I'll do it all tomorrow. And they were like, well, we could actually use some live action shots too. And he was like, fuck. Alright, well, if you can come in the next day and bring in a green screen, I'm not leaving my office though. Once again, it's my lunch break. We're doing this all on my lunch break. And that's how bored he seemed in this movie. This is where we start to get into the more morally reprehensible movies for me, the ones where I kind of had to cherry pick, like, okay, these are all kind of offensive in some way, but which ones would I rather watch over the other? So now we have Songbird at number 4. This movie is the COVID-19 Michael Bay produced thriller, but unfortunately, it's awful. It's not really a movie that has something to say specific about the virus or the world that we are in right now. It's just a movie that is very obviously just trying to exploit our current situation for money, for entertainment. A movie that at one point is definitely emphasizing how important protection from the virus is, but then as the movie goes on, it seems like there's just a blatant disregard for that. And it just seems like, well, we just gotta get out of here and live our lives. And it's like, that's kind of a dangerous message to be kind of pushing at a time like this. Jesus Christ. I understand they want you to feel a certain way for the characters in these situations, but I don't care about any of these characters. It's a very short movie, hour 25 minutes, something like that. It's very short and very rushed, so you don't care about the characters. You don't care about any decisions they make where you're like, you know what, it may not be the decision I would make in this situation, but I'm rooting for you because I understand your story. No, everything is very rushed. You can even tell with the making of the film, the camera seems to be always shaking, like it's handheld. Nothing planned out, just like, hey, on the day, what if we shot it this way? Yeah, that seems to look good. And you know what? That take works fine enough. One take. Let's move on to the next set. You can tell in the way it's edited, very quickly edited too, and a lot of very very cheap-looking VFX shots, and some poor line delivery. This movie ultimately I find offensive because it tried to exploit this current situation that we're in with nothing to say, and ultimately it didn't even deliver like an entertaining just kind of B-movie. It didn't have a message, and it also just wasn't entertaining. Peter Stormare is hamming it up big time, but he is awful in this movie. His character makes no sense. Why is the Department of Sanitation running everything COVID now? That literally does not make sense. Bradley Whitford looks like he could not give a fuck. Out of the Happy Madison Netflix movies I saw this year, this and Hubie Halloween, this was definitely easily the worst one. The kind of movie where you have an annoying female character that unfortunately ended up in Hawaii with David Spade, and he's like, oh no, I invited the wrong Missy to come to Hawaii with me. And she's just a completely obnoxious, over-the-top, loud, in-your-face, irredeemable kind of person who's doing some bad shit in certain parts of the movie. But at the end of the day, David Spade falls in love with her because although she's not the Missy he was expecting, she's the Missy that he needs. That's stupid! As I said in my review, this movie gets into like some weird like Stockholm Syndrome kind of like storytelling, and where to the point where I was like, if this was like a Happy Madison thriller or like drama, this could actually work, because essentially like when he starts to turn around on Missy, like maybe she's not so bad, isn't because she did something nice, like genuinely, like she did something really weird and creepy, but it benefited him instead of hurting him for once. So he's like, you know what, she's not so bad, essentially beating him into submission just to love her. That's crazy! I know the people over at Happy Madison didn't think for 2 seconds about this premise. They just noticed, oh, free trip to Hawaii, cha-ching, let's go. But I'm sorry, like near the end of the movie when they abruptly cut it off as soon as they're like, hey, you want to hook up again? And they're like, okay, boom, credits. That's not really a happy ending or one that's satisfying for this really funny comedy. It's a disturbing one for a really misguided, unfunny, over-the-top one. This is another movie from the director of The Haunting of Sharon Tate, Daniel Farrens. And look, if he wants to make horror movies for the rest of his life, because I know he's made documentaries before, if he really wants to get a future in horror, can you please just do original stories or get someone else's script? You know, can we stop with the real-life tragedies turned into horror movies, because these are really disgusting in more ways than one. I was honestly, before I shot this video, you know, I'm going over like what I want to say beforehand, I'm like, is this worse than The Haunting of Sharon Tate? Did I ever find out? Honestly, I don't know, because both of them are really immoral, but in different ways. You know, Sharon Tate, that was, what if there's different realities, and Sharon Tate's friends actually lived in a horror movie cliche generic thriller universe, but we all know in real life she's actually dead, or something like that. And then in this movie, it's like, yeah, you know the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and her boyfriend at the time? What if we presented an alternate theory to the OJ one, and they just ride with it as if it's fact? And then you also have the fact that his horrible filmmaking, horrible directing of actors, it just continues on into this one. It goes from laughably bad to embarrassing to then just really disgusting, because they, similar to what they do with Sharon Tate, they show the murders in full on camera. And it's like, damn, I know these aren't the real people, but when you're recreating something like this, it's really not tasteful and gross, and it really did kind of make me sick at the end of the day, just like The Haunting of Sharon Tate. So this director is consistent. Just can you please stop making movies that are about real-life tragedies? If another movie you make is another one of these, then my guy, you're just showing that you aren't learning a single thing. You have to be stopped. Alright, we've reached number one. You might be wondering, Jackson, what is number one, you know? If it's not the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson, if it's not the Wrong Missy and not Songbird, then what is the worst of the morally reprehensible movies? The one where you're like, you know what? Out of all of these, this is the one I never want to watch again. In fact, it might be the worst movie I've ever seen, and it is... This is a movie about a gangster who at one point gets shot, but before he gets shot, he's staring at a woman on a beach and is like, damn, she's kind of hot. Oh, been shot. And so several months later, once he's out of the hospital, he devises a plan to kidnap that girl, because while he was in the hospital, she is all he thought about. He kidnaps her and is like, hey, I know nothing about you, but I'm gonna force you to stay here for the next year, 365 days, and hope that you fall in love with me. I'm not gonna force anything on you. I'm not gonna force you to do anything you don't want to do. But throughout this movie, I'm going to be very aggressive with you, sexually aggressive, and borderline get close to raping you in certain parts. But once again, I'm not forcing you to fall in love with me, just, you better. You better. This movie's gross. It's very obviously trying to just be another, like, risque franchise, like the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, but this one is, like, way worse than that. Because I know Christian Grey is a creep, obviously, and there's a lot of, like, morally wrong things that they try to present with those movies. But this movie, like, this is literally Stockholm Syndrome. Like, with The Wrong Missy, I was like, yeah, David Spade's being beat into submission. This is literally what's going on. And they try to present it as sexy and romantic. Oh, yeah. It's not. It's gross. There's a moment where she's, like, tied to a bed. He ties her up in a bed, and she's got, like, this pole, like, around her legs, and she, like tries to, like, move, but the pole stays stiff if she moves them far enough. So her legs are wide open at one point, and he gets real close to inserting himself. He's just so... Ugh! What a creep, but she actually falls in love with him. Despite the gross, grotesque, and evil things this gangster, may I remind you, this gangster is doing, they present this as like, this is a good thing. And then they also have a sequel bait ending, which, oh, if only COVID wasn't a thing, we'd be filming it right now. I hope that sequel is permanently shut down. You know, I don't know what the hell they were thinking. It doesn't help that the actors, none of the performances particularly stand out. None of the characters are interesting. A lot of them are just infuriating. The writing for them is awful. But the movie itself, like, it looks pretty in the sense that the camera quality is good, and it's pretty much in focus. But there's nothing about the filmmaking that stands out. You can tell the way they're making it is just trying to be 50 Shades of Grey. And it's so awful. At the end of the day, there's just so many parts of this movie where I was like, you know, I gotta step away for a second. And I'd pause it and go do something else for a bit. And I'd come back, unpause, and then I'd be like, I gotta pause it again. You know, it's just so hard to sit through. That's why I'm like, this might be one of the worst movies I've ever seen, because there's a lot of movies that I've said before are like the worst I've ever seen, but some of them have a little bit more merit, at least for me. If I was like, you know what, if I would rather watch this or 365 Days, it's this. You know, there's just nothing to like about 365 Days. It's boring, it's gross, it's poorly done all around the board, and I hope there is no 365 Days 2 Electric Boogaloo. So there you go, that's my worst list of 2020, the movies that were pretty bad, but not as bad as 2020 itself. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in like a month for the best of the year video, because like I said, I want to see The Father first. I think that counts as a 2020 movie. I want to see that first before I make anything official. And there's also some other movies that I'd like to see, just to see if they have a chance to get into the top 10, because you never know. So until then, if you have a worst of the year list you would like to share, or if you have any opinions on the movies I talked about, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.